Hello everyone and welcome to the new Power Dev server, or rather, version 2.0. That's right, we seem to be in 2.0 territory now. As everyone likely knows by now, this is a huge update for Naval that's changing pretty much everything about the mode, at least on the economy side of things. I'm going to start by covering the tech trees, then I'm going to talk about the new blue water ships. There aren't actually any new coastal water ships, but in the future dev servers we get, if they're separate, I'll cover blue water first, coastal second. Before I get started here, I would like to mention that the order I'm going to review these ships in is going to be primarily decided by my Patreon supporters. I try not to mention it much because it certainly does feel like shilling, but I figured I would mention it here because it seems fitting. Anyway, on to the video. First off, I'm going to go through every single new tech tree. First off, here's the American Blue Water Fleet, which it seems mostly inoffensive until you get to this, which makes absolutely no sense, and I absolutely hate the specifics of how they laid out the heavy cruisers. But it's functional, so I guess I'll give it a pass. Here's the US Coastal Fleet, which is about as you'd expect. Nothing really that interesting here. Next up, Germany's Blue Water Fleet. Also about how you'd expect. One interesting thing here, the Leipzig is going to be cheaper than the Köln, and the Admiral Graf Spee has not had its dispersion fixed, meaning there is an objectively correct line to grind. I don't know how Gaijin managed that, but there's not really a reason to go down this one, so that's something alright. Next up, here's Germany's Coastal Fleet, which is, again, about as you would expect. No real surprises here, except maybe the Jaguar and Köln coming after the AFDs. I feel like these should be unlinked, but whatever. Next up is the USSR's Blue Water Fleet. Again, about as you would expect. It's very fast to get to cruisers by this path, but you get the Kafkas, which is terrible. So, Either way, this looks like a relatively inoffensive tree, though it's still strange having the Shapayev and Sverdlov split, but that's something that's going to hold up through most of these trees. Kind of splitting things that are very similar for no discernible reason. And here is their coastal water fleet, which uniquely, they are the only country that actually has a third branch for their armored riverboats. Now you're actually going to have to research this to get down to tier 5, but yeah, you get a little more choice, I suppose. Up next, Great Britain. Here's their blue water fleet. Again, London and Kent are split, despite being county classes. Okay. So yeah, again, just kind of what we expect from the previous ones. Coastal Fleet, again, just 2 lines, relatively average, nothing really worth noting here, as said previously. Next up is Japan, who's, well, about as you'd expect, like the others. It is worth noting that they probably have the fastest grind to a cruiser, though it's also not a very good one. So this tree is rather quick to get through. Though also, one thing that I actually like that they did, they put the Suzuya in front of the Mogami, meaning you actually have a logical progression of classes, which I wish they would replicate in pretty much every other tree, other than this one. This makes sense, but why didn't it happen elsewhere? And then you have Japan's Coastal Fleet, which is, again, about as much as you'd expect. The weird thing here is that they split the Type K8 from the Type K3 and Type K7, though, again, just 2 pretty linear lines, about as expected. Next up is Italy, which is almost entirely linear, other than this one light cruiser. They also didn't get much new in this patch, so yeah, have fun with that, guys. Next up is the Coastal Fleet for Italy, which is, again, about as you'd expect. Nothing really that different here. Though it is worth noting the Sparviero and Fresia both went up to tier 4, so they'll still be able to grind everything in the Coastal Fleet section like they could before. Overall, I kind of like how these new tech trees work, but the main problem is they're just so linear. They feel even more linear than the old tech trees even. There's just 2 lines, you're going to have to grind both to get past the tier requirements, and a lot of the placements don't make sense. The Pensacola was the first US heavy cruiser designed after the treaty, and yet it comes after the Portland, which was the third, when the Northampton was the second. These two are almost the same, with the Portland being a modification, and yet they're in separate trees. doesn't make any sense. It kind of feels like the person who laid this out was looking more at BRs and performance statistics and not the actual progression of the classes. But, I guess that's just how it is. It's functional, and that's what matters. Now I'm going to cover individual ships, starting with the US, and going from left to right, in order of battle rating. First is USS Welburn. This is the exact same as the Reserve Clemson, which is DD 336. It has a nice camo, but other than that, it is identical, and I can't really recommend buying it. Next up is USS Moffett, which is roughly the same as the Porter in the tech tree, however it has a bunch of Oerlikon cannons instead of machine guns, and it also has an asymmetric Chicago piano, which is going to haunt my nightmares. Overall, the ship seems fine. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it at 5.0. You're going to be facing Dreadnoughts in this thing, and it has no chance at all against them. But it doesn't seem that bad, so I'd maybe recommend it depending on how it performs after the patch. Up next is the USS New Orleans, and I know that people's biggest question would be, what is the dispersion of the guns? It's the exact same as every other US 8-inch gun, meaning I can't really recommend this for anti-ship combat, though notably, it does get an enhanced anti-air loadout, specifically one of the late war ones, meaning that it has 24 Bofors autocannons and 28 Oerlikon autocannons. This means that it's likely the best anti-air ship in the game. So, I would actually highly recommend unlocking and using this one alongside Dreadnoughts. After using your USS North Dakota, you can spawn the New Orleans and then provide anti-air cover to your friendly Dreadnoughts, racking up some free kills while also helping your team win. Speaking of the North Dakota, here's the first American Dreadnought, and the first Dreadnought we're covering here. It has a couple 5-inch casemates on each side, along with having some super firing guns, which isn't actually very common with these starting Dreadnoughts. It can get 10 onto a target, however the shell does seem to be a placeholder, so it's difficult to judge its performance by this. Overall, this seems like a relatively good Dreadnought. It's not anything particularly special, however, it should be quite effective in combat, and should be able to hold its own against the others. The one notable weakness is that it does seem to have a weakness to plunging fire, as if you'll notice, the deck doesn't seem armored at a very high level, meaning that most of the top layer of the ship isn't really very well protected. However, from the sides it is well protected, and it does have some coal bunkers covering the middle. Next up is Germany, starting with the Type 1924 Iltis. This is about the exact same as the 1924 Leopard, and there's not much else to say about it. It does have a nice camo, but I can't really recommend unlocking it. Up next is the Sms West Fallen, which is Germany's first Dreadnought. This one has a unique hexagonal layout of its guns, which is actually represented also on the Helgoland and on Japan's Dreadnought, which allows it to have 6 turrets, however, only 4 can get onto a single target, giving it a broadside of 8 guns. This one has 11-inch guns, unlike the other Dreadnoughts which all have 12-inch guns, or 283mm guns, when most of the others have 305mm guns. Notably, it does have some 88s for air defense, however, these aren't particularly effective due to being rather slow. They also aren't the World War II 88s, so don't expect that kind of performance. This one also has quite a few secondaries spread throughout the hull, with numerous casemates. Overall, this seems like a relatively average Dreadnought. I can't really say too much about its performance at the moment. It does seem to have a bit less per shot damage, but it also has a fire rate of 3 rounds per minute, which is higher than the others represented here. Overall, it seems like it's going to be a fine ship, though not a meta-defining one. The West Fallen has a relatively alright armor scheme, however it is worth noting it's actually rather thin over most of the ship, only having a particularly thick part here in the middle, though it also does have excellent coverage by its fuel tanks and coal bunkers, which might make it take a lot less damage beneath the waterline. Up next is the SMS Helgoland, which is pretty much like the West Fallen, but quite a lot larger. It has a similar protection under the water, though it is a bit more tightly knit on the middle, rather than everywhere. It has a much better armor layout, covering more of the ship in the thicker parts of the armor, and it also has 12-inch guns, but maintains the fire rate of 3 rounds per minute, giving it a better damage output. Overall, this seems like one of the tankier ships. It's also quite wide and beautiful, I would say. Just a very aesthetic ship. However, it is limited by its 8-gun broadside, So I think this one should do alright, however, it is still hard to say how it will perform. The armor layout isn't bad, though I do think that this one is going to be, again, alright, but not meta-defining. Up next is the USSR, first starting with the Kirch. This is effectively a premium version of the Fruins with a really funky blue and white camouflage. It is worth noting this one's actually a little different than it may first appear from the standard tech tree one. It actually has 4 torpedo launchers in the middle, each having 3 torpedoes, and the guns at the rear are spaced out, which should presumably give this one a better firing arc. Overall, this one's alright, but again, I can't recommend buying it, just like all the other 250 Golden Eagle premiums. Next up is a ship that I can't pronounce the name of for the life of me, but is a premium Shapayev. It is statistically identical to the Shapayev in all ways that I can find. It has the same speed, same crew, same armor, same guns, same everything seemingly, except it comes with a talisman and earns twice the amount of silver lions. Overall, if you want to grind through the Russian tech tree, this one seems like a pretty good choice. And, if you'll notice from its penetration with its AP shells, despite having 6-inch guns, it can actually pose a bit of a threat to some dreadnoughts. It's just not likely to go through the thicker parts of their armor belts. Overall, the ship seems okay, however I am going to have to wait and see how the cruisers perform against dreadnoughts to really gauge their performance properly. The first Russian dreadnought is the Poltava, which is a Gangut class destroyer. This should be quite the effective ship in combat. It has quite a few secondaries, and a relatively good armor scheme, along with a lot of coal bunkers and fuel tanks inside, which should provide quite a lot of cover from incoming damage. Most notably, the SAP shells of this gun have 55 kilograms of explosive filler, which is much more than anyone else has. These guns are going to deal absolutely absurd amounts of damage when they hit, and if they penetrate, you can pretty much kiss that whole section of your ship goodbye. They should be excellent at killing both crew and ammo racks, and with a 12-gun broadside, which is much higher than comparable ships, the Gangut class is going to be incredibly dangerous, specifically the Poltava. This next ship is something I can't quite pronounce, so I'm going to call it the Maria. This is the class that came after the Gangut, meaning it's a bit improved. It has a roughly similar armor and protection scheme, though one of its turrets is facing forwards rather than backwards, giving it a faster reaction time against ships ahead of it, but a slower reaction time against ships behind it. It has the same shell type, same reload, same about everything. It's just a bit larger, a bit better protected, and has more crew. It also has a slightly lower top speed, however, this is still on par with other dreadnoughts, so it's about the same as them really. Overall, these two should be the best ships in the patch, specifically the Maria, as it is going to absolutely devastate anything it hits, while being able to take damage quite well in return. Unless something unexpected happens, Russia does look like it's going to have the absolute king and queen of dreadnoughts in this patch. Next up is Great Britain, starting with the Montgomery. This is about the same as the Clemson L-45, however it trades a few Oerlikons for more main guns. It still has less than an American Clemson, and it's still too expensive for what you're getting really, so despite the nice looking camo, I am never going to recommend buying this thing under any circumstances. You could get a 75% off coupon on it, and I'd still be hesitant to say it's anywhere near a good buy. Next up is the Garland H-37, which, oddly enough, it's not listed as a new vehicle, but it is. So, I don't know what they're doing there. But anyway, this ship is a bit strange, as I'm not really sure why it's at 4.0. It has one less main gun than the G-Class, though it has 4 Oerlikon cannons and a 76 that can fire shrapnel as an anti-air shell. Overall, this one seems alright. I can't really say anything specific about it though, as its battle rating seems a little unfinished, which I would say is indicated by it lacking the new vehicle banner and not being listed in the patch notes. So for now I'm going to gloss over this one and hope it gets fixed later, because right now it's just a bit strange. Next up is the J-Class Flotilla Leader. This one seems like it would be about on par with something like an N-Class. Overall, it seems good. In fact, I would highly recommend buying this one for grinding the British tech tree, rather than playing through the Clemson L-45, as this one currently seems like the best value premium for doing so, and is at a good BR with a very, very large lineup of another 5 ships in the tech tree. Overall, I think this one's going to be the best premium grinder for the British tree, as it means you don't have to grind through the Clemson L45, and it gets an absolutely massive lineup of other 4.3s. Up next is the first British Dreadnought, HMS Dreadnought. It can get 8 guns into a broadside, however it does have 10, with 1 turret on the other side. Overall, the armor layout is alright, however it is rather scarce up towards the top of the ship, though the thick parts do cover quite a lot of the ship. Up next is the HMS Colossus, which is rather unique. It has a very asymmetric layout with its 2 middle turrets, however they can fire all the way across the ship at specific angles, allowing it to get 10 guns into a broadside. This gives it an above average damage output. It has an alright armor scheme, though it is rather lacking compared to many of the other Dreadnoughts, and its side turrets, like on the Dreadnought, are lacking the protection from the coal bunkers. Overall, this one seems quite good. It'll likely be one of the less defensive ones, but it will have more firepower. Also, you should really ignore the maximum speed listed for this one, because I promise you, it is not going to hit 81 kilometers per hour. For our second to last country is Japan, starting with the Ijn Setsu. This one is pretty much just a premium Matsuki. It's in the same position as all the other 250 Golden Eagle premiums, and again, while it looks quite nice, I can't really recommend it. After this comes the Ikoma, which is an interesting ship. While Gaijin classifies this one as a battlecruiser, I think it's just counted as an armored cruiser realistically, so I suppose they don't actually have a classification for that. It has quite a few secondaries situated in the middle, and it has a 4-gun broadside of 12-inch cannons. Overall, I think this is the wild card of the patch. It's very difficult to tell how it's going to perform. It will likely struggle against Dreadnoughts. It's going to struggle against other Dreadnoughts, however, with its rather effective protective scheme, and the 2 armored decks most notably, I think this one's going to be particularly tanky, and good against specifically destroyers with all of its secondaries. It may also be particularly threatening to cruisers if left alone, as the 12-inch APC is no joke against ammo racks, and could provide a lot of instant kills in the hands of a good player. Overall, I'm not sure what to think about this one, but I think it's going to be quite effective. It's effectively like the Peacock of this patch, where I said that it looks very fun, but it's difficult to tell how it'll perform. Hopefully this one's again like the Peacock, and provides a fun, if slightly unconventional ship. Up next, and the last Dreadnought we'll be covering, spoilers for Italy, is the Ijn Setsu. This one is similar to the German Dreadnoughts, where it has the hexagonal layout of the guns. Overall though, it looks like a relatively average Dreadnought. It has a relatively good armor scheme, and it can get 8 guns onto a broadside, along with having relatively standard Dreadnought mobility, and seemingly slightly above average protection. I think this one's going to be, again, just a relatively good Dreadnought. It's not going to be one of the meta-defining ones, however it will certainly be a viable top tier for Japan. Up last is Italy, who only got a premium version of the Dardo. That's it. That's really it. They didn't get a Dreadnought. I hope they get a Dreadnought by the time of the second dev server, because while this thing may look cool, we really need a Dreadnought for Italy to be competitive. Overall, that's all the new vehicles in the new patch. We have quite a few Dreadnoughts coming, and it's very difficult to judge how the new meta will be until I've actually played a few live matches with and against them. Aircraft are going to be quite effective against them, but it's worth keeping in mind that while they can't properly defend themselves against aircraft, they do have rather thick armor, which may make them difficult to take out. While it'll be easy to get a bomb onto them, it might not kill them. This means that top tier cruisers like the New Orleans with high AA will be very important to teamfights, as they'll provide an AA screen for the relatively vulnerable Dreadnoughts. It's worth noting though that many light cruisers are going to massively struggle against the Dreadnoughts, and while some heavy cruisers can pen them, the light cruisers might not be able to efficiently. Overall, there's just so many moving parts in this new update that it's very hard to tell what's going to happen, and while I'm trying to judge these vehicles based on their stats, it might not work when the new meta is going to be so different that what stats matter might be different now. Overall, I am hyped to see this update, but what I'm most hyped for in it is the new trees. Not because of whatever this is, but because it's going to make it so much easier for players to get the ships they want faster. Hopefully this will get a lot more players to get to the ships they want faster, and will lead to a massive increase in the size of the naval player base. This mode really is a diamond in the rough, and I do think that this update is going to help unearth it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more naval content.